The other challenge that is with a paper-based system is being able to track the issues that are identified and make sure they get routed to the right person that can provide a competent follow-up to address that issue and then close it out in the system and make sure it's been completed. So that whole paper trail of managing that process, it can be really challenging.
So tell me, so how do employees know that equipment is safe to operate? What does that procedure and process look like?
Yeah, I'm going to say most companies have very defined practices that require inspections. So in most instances, like a fork truck, it's required to be inspected prior to use. So employees, as part of their mobile equipment training, fork truck training, they actually are trained in what are the conditions that they need to evaluate prior to the start of the shift in order to make sure that the equipment will operate the way it's intended to operate. Oftentimes it's the status of the windshield, the status of the brakes, the safety belt, is it intact? A wide range of questions, and it's in a checklist format. And then the operator goes through and it's either pass or fail, yes or no. If there's conditions that need to be addressed, there's usually a section to be able to make notation as to what needs to be addressed. And then that gets put in, a folder where employees can actually make a request to have things repaired and not operate the equipment, or if it's a clean bill of health, they just go about their day and start their work.
Wait, so this is something that is required every time you drive a forklift?
Every time. Every operator that has to operate a fork truck at the start of the shift usually performs an inspection. And then there's usually some type of mechanics inspection that gets performed on a periodic basis as well.
So, and how many, you talk about, I don't know, we'll use Amazon, for example, or one of these big retail giants, right? How many forklifts are we talking in a warehouse?
Yeah, it can range from, a handful to probably very easily in the neighborhood of, say, 100 to 200
a day. And are all these things in operation daily?
If it's a 24/7 warehouse, it would be on multiple shifts daily. So yes,
multiple shifts daily. So we're talking hundreds of paper inspections.
Yeah, absolutely.
So walk me through that process. So I have, you just mentioned, so you have somebody that goes up to a forklift, they have their paper inspection, they grab it out of the, I'm guessing some sort of room. I'm thinking like old school, like stacks of paper. I'm just going to grab one of these off. I complete my inspection. I put it in a folder. I put it back in the room, and then I jump on that forklift and I operate it. That's
pretty much the way a lot of companies operate today.
It seems like a waste. It seems like a waste of time.
Yeah. So think about the challenges that create, right? And again, if you go back to the risks of being a successful inspection. So one, you have to trust that the operator will perform the inspection at the start of the shift to verify the condition of the equipment. You have to make sure that they're done every shift of every day of every week, and every week of every year, right? And so that governance process, requires audits. So usually, most companies will kind of verify, periodically they'll go through and do a safety inspection of a warehouse. And that might be one of the things that they ask to see, is kind of evidence that the checklists are being performed as they're supposed to. The other challenge that is with a paper-based system is being able to track the issues that are identified and make sure they get routed to the right person that can provide a competent follow-up to address that issue and then close it out in the system and make sure it's been completed. So that whole paper trail of managing that process, it can be really challenging as well.
So let's say somebody's driving a forklift, right? They get hurt, right? Something happens. And now there's some sort of inquiry or audit, right? Or investigation that goes into that issue. I'm guessing the first thing you're going to look at, if there's some sort of issue or incident that happened, is you're going to go back through, are we saying stacks of paper or folders of paper to make sure that forklift driver completed that inspection?
Absolutely. That is one of the first things you pull when you form an investigative committee to review and get to root cause. One of the very first things you're going to want to look at is, what is the status of the inspections? Was there any deficiencies identified that weren't addressed? What is the condition of the piece of equipment? That's where you start out, really, not just with fork trucks. It could be an EOT crane, it could be a jib, a wide range of devices that are used in a warehouse.
I mean, you got to think. First of all, outside of it just being a royal pain in the ass, right? I mean, time consuming, right? I have an investigation. Now I have to go back and retrieve this data, go back through each one of these sheets. I mean, I guess I would assume that oftentimes paper is misplaced, damaged. I mean, I guess it could be destroyed, right?
All of the above. I mean, I'm gonna say in most instances, people try to do the right thing, but sometimes folders get misplaced. Sometimes they don't get. Usually they stay out in the field, for a week or two, and then they're put in an envelope and sent someplace else for storage and retention, to meet the OSHA requirements. But sometimes, there's just a breakdown and inspections just stop being performed. And oftentimes people don't know that the inspections aren't being performed until you have an event like you just described, or you conduct one of these audits and you've already gone for a period of time when you're out of compliance and vulnerable. And to be frank, I mean, fundamental to a really good safety program is making sure your equipment is going to operate the way that you intend to operate it, which means that you have a checklist of some sort that identifies what are the critical things that have to operate exactly the way they're designed to be operated. And you have to verify through an inspection that is the case. I've been involved in many incidents with and without injury where there were inspections weren't being performed, and we had to take corrective actions immediately for that.
Incredibly archaic. Incredibly. Well, I guess the other thing is I will call them real-time updates and alerts. I mean, if there's some sort of issue, I mean, are those issues ignored? I guess it seems like we're playing a game of telephone to address one issue that could, I guess, potentially be avoided. And I would say the second part of that is, I mean, don't paper-based systems put workers at risk?
Well, I think ultimately, if they're executed and governed and the way that they're intended to be, then I think you can mitigate those risks to the workers. The challenge is if you say for example, in one warehouse at one site, you've identified a root cause, and maybe it was the checklist didn't cover all of the items that you should have covered. You want to add something to it. So then you have to go back and you want to change that at all of the other warehouses that might be using that same checklist. You want to modify that to include that new question that you want evaluated.
See, that's interesting. You bring up a good point, especially for safety managers, right, that are overseeing multiple locations. You have to go to a physical location to do these assessments. It seems like that absolutely hampers effective safety management, right? I mean,
it's a huge challenge because, I mean, these forms for this inspection, the official folder might be like in the shipping warehouse, right, office area. But there's going to be incidences where employees put them in their personal lockers. Maybe they're out in the field closer to the equipment that they're operating, so they don't have to walk all the way over to do that. So it's really hard to manage all that paper because it gets dispersed in a lot of different locations. And if you want to do an update, you got to track all those remote locations down on where that paper might be stored in order to get that updated form out there.
Interesting. So let's say there's an emergency, seems like it's about as slow of a response as possible. Like in the event of an emergency, obviously quick access and quick response is critical to, saving lives, right? And if I'm thinking about paper systems, I mean, their inherent limitations in accessibility and speed. I mean, it could be make or break, right? It could be a matter of life or death. And I hate to say it, but it seems like, that slow response, I mean, every second counts in this game.
Yeah, I mean, in a well-executed paper-based system, there is an administrative burden. It does require time. You can maintain to be compliant with the OSHA standard, but it takes a lot of effort in order to stay on top of it to make sure that you're compliant.